Welcome to Tech Intersect. I'm your host, Tanya Evans, and my life and work exist at the heart of law, business, and technology. Yeah, I've earned a few fancy titles and degrees over the years, but the bottom line is I'm a writer, speaker, teacher, and lifelong learner, and I'm really excited that you've joined me on this journey. So what is Tech Intersect? Well, it's authentic, empowering conversations with really interesting guests who demystify complex topics to prepare you for the future. Because your future is now. And it exists where law, business, and tech intersect. Get ready to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started.
Congrats, Tanya, on your 100th episode. That's quite an achievement.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of my 2-part celebration of the 100th episode of Tech Intersect. Cue the applause. Cue the air horns. Burr, 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 burr. Okay. Maybe not the air horns, just the applause. And the champagne. Please send the champagne. In this part 2, I share one of my favorite Tech Intersect conversations with someone used to being on the other side of the interview, none other than preeminent crypto journalist, podcast host, and producer of Unchained and Unconfirmed, and now author of The Cryptopians, Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze, Laura Shin. This is a highly anticipated book. It's due out on February 22nd, 2022. It's a lot of twos, and we even talk about that in the episode. But we also talk about the past, present, and future of crypto, and Laura's thrilling and insightful look at the rise, controversies, promise, pitfalls, and transformative impact of Ethereum on crypto, NFTs, DeFi, and beyond. Now, I launched this little podcast that could on January 1st, 2020 to explore the future of law, business, and technology. You remember, January 2020, before the world spun off of its axis and reeled from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that still plagues us as I speak. Although I do believe better days are indeed ahead. I am speaking that into existence. That's it. That's it. No more. No mas. Can we move on? Let's all heal and work together and get this thing right in 2022. But anyway, I digress. Fast forward to today, February 1st, 2022. I have interviewed over 90 new and notable trailblazers leading in the future of work and wealth and creativity with a decided focus on crypto assets, financial inclusion, and economic empowerment in a Web3 world. And I've shared my Prof T on IP insights into the intellectual property implications of crypto, blockchain, and Web3 in my Ping the Prof episodes. And if you go back and listen to part 1 of this 2-part episode for my conversation with Minda Harts, you will also hear me list a few of the new and notable folks who've graced this podcast with their insights, expertise, humor, and reflections on the future of work, wealth, and creativity. I thank each and every one of my previous guests, and none of this, of course, would happen without my amazing producer, Stephanie McNeil of Creators Child Productions. Thanks, Steph, for your pleasant persistence, for your expertise, for your professionalism, for your friendship for 20 plus years and counting. Keep rising to the top. Let's go. And finally, thanks to you, my faithful and fearless listeners and supporters. There is no show without you. So keep listening, learning, and leveraging, because in 100 episodes, there's something for everyone. So definitely visit or revisit past episodes and continue to join me every week where law, business, and tech intersect. Okay, before we hop into the ep, please take a moment to follow this podcast and then like, share, and comment so that others who would benefit from this content can find it. And use the hashtag TechIntersect100. That's Tech Intersect and the number 100 for any ahas, oohs, oh my goodness, light bulb moments, love this, want to hear more of this, so I can interact with you and say thank you on the Twitters. That's at Tech Intersect 100. Okay, it's time to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. In this episode of Tech Intersect, I am so very excited to flip the script and welcome Unchained and Unconfirmed podcast host Laura Shin to the show. Laura is a renowned crypto journalist who began her coverage at Forbes before leaving to continue her work as entrepreneur and host of her pods. They are described as your no-hype resource for all things crypto. They certainly are a constant companion for me, in addition to the newsletter. And now Laura is the author of a new book, The Cryptopians: Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. And I'm especially thrilled to have Laura join me on this very special episode to celebrate the 100th episode of Tech Intersect. So we'll talk about all of that and more in a moment. But first, Laura, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Tanya. I'm so glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's jump in. It's really a thrill. One of my earlier thrills was actually being on your show, but to have you here in conversation is a real joy. I think the world of you and all that you have done and continue to give to the ecosystem. So this is a real pleasure. And for those who listen, they will know your background, but there'll be a not insignificant number of folks who don't know your origin story as it relates, one, to your esteemed career as a journalist in general, and what types of stories you were working on and covering before you began writing about crypto.
Yeah, so I have been a journalist for a long time. And initially, I did kind of just feature-y type things. I would cover arts a lot. There was a period I covered travel a little bit, health-related things, yoga stuff, because I also was a yoga instructor at that time. And then in 2007 to 2008, I decided I wanted to start covering climate change and sustainability issues. And so at that time, I went to Columbia University for the graduate school in journalism. And of course, the year I graduated was maybe not the best year to be graduating from journalism school, or really any school, and be looking for a job. That was the year that the media industry actually shrank 22%. And so it actually took me a few more years to finally get a job back in journalism. But when I did, I was covering personal finance, and that was kind of the launch pad for me to eventually get into crypto, because years later I was freelancing for Forbes. And by that time I'd been covering personal finance for, I think, 4 years. And it's one of those beats that doesn't change a lot. And so I was getting to the point where I felt like I wasn't necessarily learning new things when I was writing articles. And so my editors at Forbes threw me a bone, and they said, oh, hey, we have this idea to do a Forbes FinTech 50 list. Do you want to head up that list? And so another reporter and I did, and we divided the list into categories. And I took the category of digital currency and fell down the rabbit hole, as they say. And yeah, now that was 6.5 years ago. So the good news is, of course, crypto is constantly changing. So I never have that feeling of kind of already knowing everything and not having new opportunities to learn. And so in that regard, this beat is pretty much perfect for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you get any pushback or resistance when you wanted to focus exclusively on this space, particularly at that time?
Yeah, because that was spring of 2015. Very quickly wanted to only cover at that time what was called Bitcoin and blockchain. And so it really wasn't until the middle of 2017 when I was getting these other job offers and things like that, that Forbes finally agreed to let me cover it full time. And at that time, I also then switched from being a freelancer for them to becoming a senior editor. And hilariously, things were moving so fast in crypto at that time that I then became the fastest staff writer to ever go from being hired to having a cover story because there was an article I was already working on as a freelancer, which we had, been thinking, oh, this definitely is a potential cover story. And then things just were taking off so fast with all the initial coin offerings at that time,
Right.
that then I think something like either 2.5 or 3 weeks after I officially got hired, the cover story on initial coin offerings came out.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. The timing. You can not time anything in this space, but there is some type of divine timing at some point that puts people in the right place at the right time. That absolutely happened to you. I remember the first law review article that I wrote, titled, in this space. I'm an intellectual property lawyer by training, as you know, but fell down my own rabbit hole in 2017. And at the end of 2017, you'll remember when CryptoKitties came on the scene with a gangster lean, and completely upended the Ethereum virtual machine. And the law review article was titled CryptoKitties, Cryptography and Copyright. And I went to all of the biggest law professor conventions and conferences, and they might as well have just thrown tomatoes at me. I might as well have been wearing, a tin hat at this point, who's laughing last because it's winning. And everybody now cites to that work. So I just, I'm not one to gloat, but I am a little petty, Lars. So I rather enjoy that. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, my Forbes editors, I'm not going to blame them at all.
Right.
The incentives at the time definitely were to have me keep covering personal finance, because I was definitely generating a lot of page views
Right.
for my coverage in that space. So clearly the incentives were for them to have me keep doing that. But yes, once I said, well, I have these other job offers, so if you don't allow me to cover this full time, then I'm going to have to do it
Right.
somewhere else. And so, yeah, that provided its own incentive.
I bet. And ultimately, that somewhere else, no matter whether or not anything was in between, ultimately led you to your entrepreneurial endeavors. And it looks like you're killing the game. And you really are a resource and reference. I'm so glad to receive the newsletter. My students use it all the time for their hot topics. And when they list them in order, I know exactly where they got it from. So I don't know if that's plagiarism or an ode to Laura Shin, but talk to me about what entrepreneurship and doing this type of coverage on your own terms means to you as well.
Well, I've been a journalist now for 23 years, I guess.
Mm,
And for more than half my career, I've worked for myself. And the main
mm,
reason for that is that it's kind of what we were saying earlier. When things get too easy for me, or like if I feel like I kind of already know stuff, I lose motivation, like
right.
completely. Like I really can't do work if I don't feel that it's challenging for me in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I've even hilariously, I've had personality tests say this, that, even if people are praising me for my work on something, if it becomes too easy for me, I just cannot be bothered to do it at all. And
Mm,
so I think that's why early on in my career, I kept quitting, what were actually really good journalism jobs. But
right.
if you're being hired to do kind of a low level job and you have to do that day in and day out, and you have my kind of personality, like it's not going to work out super well for me.
Right.
Not that they were ever unhappy with my work. It's more that I had a really, really hard time forcing myself to do it. So for me to have had the podcast generate enough interest and downloads that I was then able to go out on my own. And now I'm in the position where I don't have to work for anybody ever again. I could
Right.
probably, just keep doing what I'm doing. And, what that mix currently is for me is doing the shows and then doing my book with, more than 50% of my time. And that has worked out really well. And I love it. I
Mm,
feel that I'm a writer at my core. And
mm-hmm.
so, I mean, hilariously, I did once see a review of my podcast that said, I mean, this was early on, probably when I was not as seasoned in doing my
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And the review said, she sounds like a print journalist who has a podcast. And I was like, well, that's because that's what I am.
You're like, precisely.
So, like, yeah, but the thing is that even though I'm a writer at my heart, I would say that I am also an extrovert. And so having that mix, doing the shows, which gives me some social time, and then doing the more solitary writing work, which is what speaks to my heart and what I just really, really love. That mix is perfect for me and I love it. And it's been super fun. And so, yeah, I've really enjoyed being able to do that for these past 4 years now, because I left Forbes in February 2018.
No, that really shines through. And I think that's why you have the background of journalism comes through, because you ask the next right question that everybody wants to know, and then you take it a step further. And so it's informative, it's engaging, and it really is leading the way in terms of crypto journalism for sure. And obviously, everything that you've just described leads to why you have this next great challenge that you took on. Talk to us about writing this book. Obviously, it's the next logical step for you, given your depth of knowledge in the space. You could have written about anyone and anything, given your history, including about yourself, but you chose a specific arc within the overall history of crypto since Satoshi launches Bitcoin in 2009. You chose the history of Ethereum. So talk to us about this shift into book author, and also your point of view and why it focused on the specific time of the development of Ethereum as well.
So I had always had this goal of writing a book. And when I quit Forbes, that was at the height of the initial coin offering craze. And it was basically right as the bubble was starting to burst. And so I felt like I had witnessed, this singular moment in history. And it definitely felt like it was good material for a book. And what I decided to do with that book was to describe how that whole phenomenon happened. I mean, it really was just such a juggernaut in terms of how quickly ICOs took off and began just inhaling all kinds of cryptocurrency and, making the people holding these ICOs quite wealthy, or at least their projects, in a short amount of time. And not only doing that, but doing that from across the globe. I mean, it really was a phenomenon that just had never been seen before. And so to have that take off that quickly, it just felt like it needed to be explained. How did this happen? And Ethereum really was the main platform. And so in that regard, the book definitely kind of needed to explain, where did this smart contract platform come from? Who were the people behind it? What was the history before the ICO craze? And so the book ends up being kind of like maybe 75% a history of Ethereum. And then toward the end, as the ICO craze takes off, it kind of branches out into some of the other storylines that were central to that ICO phenomenon.
It's really fascinating because when you think of those early, I'm drawn to the words that you use in your subtitle of idealists and technologists and opportunists. And there's so much of that. It is, ripe for an American tale or a universal tale, quite frankly. The idealists, the folks who are working in the trenches, building, and then those who see the opportunity and kind of glob on as well. What are some of your insights about the distinctions and the commonalities about idealism, the technologists, but also the opportunists in the space?
Well, it's just like you said. So Ethereum was created after Bitcoin had already achieved some success. So at the time that it was being formed, there were already people who were, quote unquote, Bitcoin millionaires, and people in what we would now call crypto, but at the time really was just Bitcoin. They recognized, the people who were in on this early were the ones who became Bitcoin millionaires, or at least did very well, because obviously the more money you had to put in at the beginning, the better you were able to do. Or
Right.
maybe if you just mined Bitcoin very early, but that was a small number of people. And so definitely when Ethereum came around, there was this kind of awareness that if you got in early with Ethereum, it could definitely set you up well if Ethereum itself succeeded.
Right.
And so there were definitely a lot of characters like that were involved in Ethereum early on. Definitely becomes a point of tension in the book. And one other thing that I would say about what happened at that time is that Bitcoin itself was created out of the financial crisis, right? The white
Mm-hmm.
paper was published right as a lot of crazy things were happening with like Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch and all these other big financial institutions. And then the network itself launched in January of that year,
Mm-hmm.
referencing the fact that we were in this financial crisis. And, the answer that Bitcoin provided was a technology answer. And
Mm.
what's fascinating is that same theme comes out in the creation of Ethereum, where
Mm.
there is tension between these more business minded people versus the developers. And
Mm.
I think readers will see which of those groups tends to prevail repeatedly during the history of Ethereum.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it's a really important point. And I think of some of the conversations as well as the out and outright arguments in the middle of the space, which is not particular to Ethereum. But when I think of the overall sense of community and the importance of community and the importance of consensus, using that term broadly but intentionally about what it looks like for people to have a discussion and come to some sort of agreement rather than from a competitive point of view, but one that is based in community. And so we see the messy marvelousness of that. And I think the Ethereum ecosystem certainly is a great example of that. Thinking about the idealists and the tech folks and the opportunists, it feels like now we are entering into this new evolutionary phase where you look at the statistics over the last 12 months, I should say, more folks outside of the quote unquote ecosystem starting to get in, whether it's opportunity or whatever. And between buying at least Bitcoin, let alone other coins or tokens, and certainly the NFT craze, we see a lot of people who they don't come from finance, they don't come from tech, but they are interested in the opportunity and the possibilities in the space. So I'm wondering your thoughts about if you think that we are entering into a new evolutionary phase that is moving beyond the core of crypto.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, already, that's been happening for over a year now. Hilariously, I mean, I've said this on multiple shows, but I am always reminded of a very funny tweet that I saw by Fred Ursum, the co-founder of Coinbase, where he says, as the NFT craze was taking off, he says, well, it turns out more people are interested in culture than they are in money, which
Who knew?
definitely reflects my own set of friends, because I've been telling them about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for 6.5 years now, and nobody's really gotten interested. But
Right.
now with NFTs, now some of them are actually getting interested in a different way. And so I totally think that we are seeing a lot of people who, I mean, it's so easy to just pick out any NFT headline. I mean, we're seeing
Right.
musicians and film directors and authors and photographers and artists and all different kinds of people that are now getting into crypto via NFTs. I mean, athletes, that's a big one from the
Right.
last year. So definitely now the normies are showing up. And I think what that reflects also is just how kind of like open the design space is, as probably one of the thought leader VCs would say, or just any of the other people who kind of blog about this stuff. And I think that's totally true. When you have this new tech, I mean, it's just going to be like the internet, but
Right.
as I'm sure people have seen the tweets, if the internet first started as read and then Web 2 was read and write, now it's read, write, and own. And
Yes.
when you boil it down to something that simple, that really shows that, yeah, you can have all different kinds of variations on that theme. And I think this is going to play out for decades.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of Tech Intersect. Our conversation will continue in a moment, but first, a word on an exciting opportunity.
If you've tried to figure out crypto, DeFi, and NFTs on your own on YouTube University or Podcast College, and all you have to show for it are a lot of questions, but little, if any, forward progress, I invite you to visit AdvantageEvans.com to get the answers you've been searching for about how to buy, store, and trade crypto and NFTs, and to access DeFi safely, legally, and confidently. Advantage Evans Academy offers everything from full-service VIP onboarding to prof-guided on-demand and cohort-based courses, as well as an engaging, informative, and supportive membership club. AE Explore Live for as little as just $1 a day. This club is for you if you want to learn from well-respected crypto education experts like me, transform your relationship with money, generate wealth in the new digital cash economy, create digital ownership streams that lead to generational wealth, learn to vet, buy, store, trade, earn, and sell cryptocurrencies, engage in DeFi to lend and leverage your crypto, create, buy, and trade creative and collectible NFTs, and network with other crypto-curious enthusiasts in an inclusive environment. You'll gain all of that and more in a wonderful community of like-minded, lifelong learners ready to get in and to win. If that sounds like you, join us. Visit AdvantageEvans.com to get immediate access to the resources you need and deserve. That's AdvantageEvans.com. Let's go and let's grow.
And now, back to the conversation.
It's a really exciting time, and it makes me, at this point, as we're just ending one year and going into this year of 2022, I think over these last few months in particular, but certainly the arc of 2021, and in the midst of all of the uncertainty and the tragedy and all that's going on with the pandemic, perhaps the pandemic even accelerated the progress where we're always looking for these use cases. And then we have the pandemic that really makes the point of why the internet of value and Web3 really not only just makes sense, but this is just where we are. It's not the future, it's now. Most surprising news over the last 12 months that you've covered or seen before we get to any predictions you might make for these next 12 months?
I would definitely have to say that I think the whole crypto space was surprised because when Gary Gensler was appointed the SEC chair, they said, oh, he has taught blockchain courses at MIT. He has a lot of knowledge about the technology. He's clearly very interested in it. And I think they expected that he would have a more what's the word? A stance that would be more favorable to crypto when it comes to regulation versus what Jay Clayton, the former chair of the SEC, had,
Right.
or what the former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin had toward crypto. And I don't want to put words in Gary's mouth, but whether or not he views crypto favorably is maybe an open question. However, what's clear is that his ideas about how the industry should be regulated are very different from what the industry was hoping for. And so I think that has been a big surprise. I know it's kind of an older surprise, but it definitely was probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest surprise of the past year.
I think that's really true. I'd not thought about it in that way until you mentioned it, because not only is it perhaps one of the more surprising aspects of the last 12 months, because it's so important and so impactful as people hold their breath and wait for ETFs and all, the decisions that perhaps the ecosystem thought decisions were going to happen more swiftly. And perhaps that gives us, a vision or bird's eye view into what people will be holding their breath for in this year as well. So any topics or people to watch over these next 12 months as well?
Yeah, I would definitely say regulation, I think, is going to continue
Yeah.
to be a huge story. And when I say that, I actually think it's going to branch out to include politics. Because as we
Hmm.
did see recently in the both the House Financial Services Committee hearing and then the Senate Banking Committee hearing on stablecoins,
Hmm.
there's a lot more knowledge in Congress about crypto. And so we're not necessarily getting the same kind of really elementary questions that we were getting before. Now we're
Right.
getting a lot more thoughtful stances. But what's also happening is that the good thing is that actually crypto, I wouldn't say has yet emerged as a partisan issue. However, it is true that the voices in Congress or in government that are more anti-crypto or
Hmm.
more vocal about being anti-crypto tend to be Democrats,
Right.
and the ones that tend to be more identified or more vocal about being pro crypto are Republicans. And
Right.
of course, there's, I already mentioned some Republican administration officials who were definitely anti crypto. And there's definitely Democratic Congress people who have been, sponsoring crypto legislation and otherwise who are pro crypto. However, broadly, that's at least kind of the general perception.
Right.
And what's happening is that, at least on the Democratic side, we're already seeing that there are some people who are running for office in that party who are supportive of crypto and Web3 and who are doing things like selling NFTs or tweeting
Right.
about how they think Web3 aligns with, Democratic priorities. And one of them, interestingly, is a former senior advisor to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB.
Mm.
And if you're not aware, that agency is the founding of it was really credited to Elizabeth Warren. And so for somebody who's aligned with the CFPB to be coming out and saying, I support Web3, it is in line with my goals, and here's why, that is not necessarily like a rebuke to Elizabeth Warren, but it's a
Right.
counterpoint. It's like, oh, I'm somebody who's of a similar mind as Elizabeth Warren on many issues, and yet I support Web3. So for all these reasons, I do expect that we're going to see the midterms are going to maybe show some kind of sea change when it comes to
Hmm.
attitudes to crypto, mainly because I think these politicians are going to realize that there's a lot of money in that constituency.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just actually, a few episodes ago, interviewed Matt West. He's running for Congress. He's a Democrat. I titled that episode DeFi's Candidate for Congress or something like that. And we had a really good conversation about this. He works at Intel, there's a new seat in Oregon. I think it's the sixth district for the House of Representatives. It'll be really interesting if he makes it all the way through. It's a hotly contested race, so it'll be interesting to watch this year and to see if DeFi actually sends a pro DeFi person to Congress to be added to the blockchain caucus. So let's have that on the list of people to watch over the next 12 months as well.
If you're an engineer, you're a scientist, you love Formula One, you love cycling, you love learning about how new technologies are changing the world around us, then I thought you may want to listen into my new podcast, the Neil Ashton Podcast. We talk to leading engineers and scientists from around the world, hear about their life stories, hear about new technologies, and hopefully educate you and give you a better sense of how key things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, supercomputing are changing the world around us. If that sounds like it's something you might like, you should come and have a listen.
Yeah, one thing I will add on that is that in the House Financial Services Committee hearing, when Representative Brad Sherman was making a speech that became a meme because he was talking about things like Mongoose Coin. His challenger was tweeting and soliciting donations, and people were tweeting back at her showing that they donated to her. So clearly there's a group that can be galvanized with if you are coming out with a pro crypto platform.
Absolutely. We are an ever growing, strong, might be originally small, but ever growing, mighty contingency. And there is often a lot of disagreement in the space until you get to regulation, and many people coalesce to focus. So it'll be fun, I think, to watch as 2022 unfolds. That leads me to my final question. I would like to tell listeners, first of all, that Cryptopians is available on pre-order at all outlets where your physical books and your ebooks and your audiobooks are sold. And it's set to be released on February 22nd, 2022. And I learned something new about you. You mentioned it a bit earlier today, but it's also in a recent episode of Unchained that you mentioned that you were a yoga instructor, and it was on an episode when you were talking to an astrologist. And I play numerologists on the interweb. I'm not really one, but I'm fascinated by numbers. And this idea of 2/22, 2022 leapt off the page at me. And I'm wondering if there's any significance of those numbers to your pub date, or if it's just random. Although I don't think of anything as random in the universe. But tell us, any significance to you of the 2/22, 2022?
Well, I mean, so I didn't choose the publication date, but obviously when you see that date, it looks special, right? And
Yes.
so when I tweet about the publication date now, I put little star emojis around it. I'm like, I'm like, the book is being published on, and then it's like star emoji, star emoji, star emoji, 2/22/22, star emoji, star emoji, star emoji. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a cool date. And the other reason that I like it is that I've always really liked the number 2. So,
Mm.
I probably would say it's one of my lucky numbers. And so, yeah, it's just kind of funny that it ended up that way. But the other funny thing is that actually, this was the 3rd publication date because originally it was supposed to come out in
Ah.
November, and then
Mm.
we ended up pushing that, and then it was supposed to come out in January, and then we pushed that one more time. And so so now we're definitely not going to push it anymore because people have been tweeting things at me like, "Hey, I thought this was coming out in November." But yeah, so that is the publication date. It's a cool date, and despite these delays, by the way, the supply chain issues have hit book publishing, in case you didn't know.
Mm.
So it's coming out now on what I consider a very cool date, and I'm super excited for it.
I love it. Well, the number 222 first of all, the number 2 is a powerful number, but you put 3 in a row. That's a very powerful number in numerology. It's a master number. It's linked to personal mastery and creativity. It governs the energy of the sun. It's associated with positive thoughts, with clarity and spiritual growth. So this is the date. I don't know, even if it ultimately changes, and I don't think it will, I think this is it. That this is it. You have star emojis around it, so now it cannot be changed.
Wow.
So that's amazing. That's amazing.
I love that description because, so first of all, I'm a Leo. And so when
Oh, me
you talked
too.
about the sun and yeah,
Yes.
and also, so I can't remember all the things you said in there, but I'm like, obviously it's a creative work, and I definitely got a
Mhm.
lot of self growth out of it. And was that one of the things, like something like growth, or what did you
Yes.
say?
Yes. Thoughts, clarity, growth, mastery.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I would say all those themes are definitely part of my journey with this book, which it took me almost 4 years to write. So,
Oh, that
there's
works
a
down into two
lot that
twos. Look at that.
happened. Oh, right. Yeah. And yeah, so I would say that I definitely grew a lot as a person working on this book. And so I just love what you said about the meaning of those numbers.
Well, I'm really proud of you and happy for us to get to the collective we who will be reading this book for years to come, I feel like it's evergreen. I used to be in the publishing business. We could talk about that offline as well. My family owns an independent publishing company. I am an independently published author with a series of legal reference guides that are woefully out of date. So I look forward to returning and starting to write myself. But I'm very proud of you. I love that we are connected and continue to learn and grow from each other in the space. Please tell listeners how they can connect with you, learn more about your work. I'll definitely include that in the show notes.
Perfect. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Laura Shin, and that's spelled Shin. And you can also check out the unchainedpodcast.com website and sign up for my newsletter there. And on the website itself, you will also find other ways to connect to more of my writing. You will also find the book at bit.ly/cryptopians, which is bit.ly/CRYPTOPIANS.
Perfect. Laura Shin, thank you.
Thank you.
From entrepreneurship on her own terms to a keen journalistic eye and intellectual curiosity to get to the bottom of some of the most critical topics in crypto, to the insight into and reflections on the storied tale of Ethereum and the deeply personal, dare I say, ethereal struggle of trailblazers and community to influence the coming revolution in money, culture, and power. Laura Shin does it all, and she does it extremely well. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining me for this part 2 of my 100th episode of Tech Intersect. You told a story that isn't often told, but is integral to the future of work, wealth, and creativity, as I like to say. Folks, definitely get this book at bit.ly/cryptopians. Get into this future of money. The future of money is now, and it begins with you. Now, before we sign off of this 100th episode, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this episode and this podcast with your networks. Follow me on social medias and let me know what topics you'd like to hear more of and who you want to hear from. All right, that's all for this episode. Until next time, continue to shine.
Stay in touch with host Tanya Evans via your favorite social media. On Twitter at Tech Intersect and on Instagram via the handle Tech Intersect. This podcast has been produced by Stephanie Renee for Soul Sanctuary Incorporated.